We've got our panel here now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2014 Policy Orientation. Local choice, a new solution for public education in Texas. My name is James Golson. This is my fourth policy orientation and third year now working at the foundation. And I remember my very first PO, I was doing a panel. I got asked to moderate a panel 2 months onto the job, which was absolutely terrifying. And one of my panelists was former State Representative Scott Hochberg, who, he's a brilliant man. We don't necessarily agree on everything, but I was very happy to have him on the panel. And I'd never met him prior to the day of policy orientation. And he came into the room. I knew his face. He walked up. I went over and introduced myself. And I should say that my predecessors at TPPF in the education position had always been women. It had been Jamie Story and Brooke Terry prior to me. And I introduced myself as, hello, Representative Hochberg. My name is James Golson. I'm the new analyst here. And he looked at me and he said, "You're the new education guy?" And I said, "Yes." And he just shook his head and he said, "The education department's getting uglier and uglier." And that was a harsh truth, but at least I've been here long enough now, so it's leveled out, and it's been consistently ugly for the last 3 years. So school choice in Texas, the big picture. What is the big picture? The big picture really is that there is no picture. We don't have any kind of what you would think of as traditional private school choice in Texas. We don't have education scholarships. We do not have tax credits. We don't have any of the, kind of the more cutting edge ideas that are going on in Arizona with the education savings accounts. And that really runs counter to what's going on nationally. You've seen a lot of states add programs in recent years in terms of, the scholarship program that just went into place in North Carolina, Indiana's larger statewide program, Arizona's recent reforms again on the ESA front, as well as expansions of longstanding programs like Milwaukee and Louisiana in recent years, and yet in Texas we just don't have anything like that. And really, the 83rd Texas legislature was kind of a little bit of a referendum on how far we actually are from choice in Texas. We had what I would term a test vote during the House budget proceedings on a school choice amendment, and there's really a great deal of opposition right now among Texas lawmakers to bringing school choice to Texas. And the question there is why? Why are we so opposed here? And I think part of that, a major part of that, especially amongst our lawmakers, is uncertainty about how school choice would potentially impact their community. All our lawmakers are really about what's best for their constituency. And if they see something new, they're worried it could negatively impact their school. They become uncertain. I think that leads to opposition, and it's understandable. We don't necessarily agree that we think school choice would have any negative impact on a public school system, but it is the way it is. And one solution that we're looking at here at TPPF and we'll be developing, this is still in its infancy over the next year, is looking at basically giving municipalities, the right to opt in to a school choice program rather than instantaneously putting a statewide program in place. Our hope in this program, which would be of the traditional education tax credit scholarship mold, is that this would make legislators more comfortable potentially with the idea of voting more favorably on a piece of school choice legislation, because at the end of the day, a program that's a local option would be just that. It would be a local option in the hands of their voters rather than something that they might view as, forcing onto their school district and potentially bringing negative change. The idea of a municipally run program is not new from a national perspective. You have seen choice programs go into place on a citywide or school district-wide basis before, both in Milwaukee and Cleveland, some of the country's oldest school choice programs, as well as more recently in Douglas County, Colorado, which is a very unique school district created program. But it is a new idea for Texas. Traditionally speaking, when there have been school choice initiatives put forward in this state, it's always been on a statewide basis, and it's always been met with a great deal of opposition. So, again, we hope this will be a positive step, and I'd like to turn it over to my panel now to discuss both, generally the merits and possibly drawbacks of school choice and what it could mean for the future of Texas, both, in the sense of the potential creation of a local program, but as well as school choice as a general concept. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our first panelist. First up will be Dr. Matthew Ladner. Dr. Ladner is the Senior Advisor for Policy and Research for the Foundation of Excellence in Education. He has written numerous studies on school choice and writes, I believe, annually the report card on American education, ranking K-12 performance, progress, and reform. Please welcome Dr. Matthew Ladner.
Great. Well, thanks for having me here. I'm probably get that. Good. Yeah. More slideshowy.
More slideshowy.
We're having a little technical difficulty here. So let me just briefly introduce myself. I grew up here in Texas, lived in the Beaumont-Port Arthur area, went to the University of Texas. I spent the last 10 years as an expatriate Texan living abroad in a place called Arizona. But I'm counting down the days until I can return to a state where when you go to a Mexican restaurant, you can actually order queso. And those of you who haven't lived outside Texas, you cannot believe how much you would start to miss queso if you're away from it. So I want to make three basic points in this presentation. The first point is that the public school system is a permanent part of the state of Texas. That should be blindingly obvious to everyone. The state constitution guarantees the existence of a public school system. The public broadly supports having a public school system, and for a variety of reasons I'll get to show you. Even if somebody thought that they wanted to do without a public school system, there would be no practical way to do so. Okay, so public schools are permanent. The second point I want to make, however, is that the current practice of public education as it is going on in the state of Texas right now is likely to prove to be unsustainable. Public education is permanent, but it's going to have to change. And finally, I think that despite the difficult history that parental choice has had in the state of Texas, there are some ways in which parental choice would obviously help to address the challenges the state of Texas is going to face in the future. It's not a panacea. School choice, parental choice is not a magic bullet that solves all education problems by any stretch of the imagination, but in some very concrete ways, it could improve outcomes and help deal with some very serious challenges that the state has moving forward. So let's kind of go and just quickly kind of look at some of the basic facts about the public education system in Texas. First of all, spending per pupil, even after you adjust for inflation, has increased substantially over the last 20 years. In real constant dollars, 2012 dollars, in 1990 we were spending just south of $7,000 per pupil. In the more recent figure, this is all data from the Texas Education Agency. If you want to look it up, you can just Google AEIS Texas and you can find these figures for yourself. You see there's a substantial increase in spending per pupil. And of course, at the same time over the last 20 years, we've also seen a very large increase in the numbers of pupils. So at the same time that we're spending more per pupil, we've also been accommodating a lot more pupils, okay? There's been substantial enrollment growth. This is census data from the Census Bureau showing the number of Texans 18 and under in the state. You see there was about almost 1 million increase in that figure between 2000 and 2010, okay? And that's no small, now of course not all 18 and unders are actually in school. Some 4-year-olds are in public schools in a pre-K program, some aren't. The census unfortunately only keeps track of 5 to 17, which kind of underestimates this impact on the public school system, or under 18, which slightly overestimates it. But no matter how you look at the data, there's been a huge increase in the number of kids going into public schools in Texas, okay? So one of the Austin American Statesman ran this story that included this photograph in 2010. It's about a high school in Round Rock called Cedar Ridge. It was a brand new high school that was built in 2010 for a cost of about $85 million, and it was built for 2,500 students. Well, when the story ran, this brand new high school that had just been finished was surrounded by dozens of portable buildings. It was accommodating over 2,900 students. And the kids, bless their hearts, went and put up this sign that says, "Welcome to Portableville," right? Now, this is much more reflective of the reality of public education, quite frankly, than most of the debate that we see around parental choice in the Texas legislature, right? This is obvious, often, almost always presented as some sort of zero-sum game. Oh my gosh, if we lift the charter school cap, then kids will be leaving the public school system and they'll have all these difficulties and whatnot, okay? The reality is that Texas has been facing an onslaught of enrollment growth. You guys are just masterful at creating new jobs and new opportunities, and people are moving from everywhere to come here, right? Why wouldn't they, right? It's Texas, okay? And the net result of that is you're having to build a lot more in the way of facilities. So down there in the white, you can see that in 1990, 10.5% of total Texas public school spending went to capital outlay and debt service, and the most recent figure I got was for 20% going to that figure, okay? So the percentage of our total public school funding that is actually making it into the classroom in any sense is going down because we're having to keep building more and more buildings to accommodate enrollment growth. Now, the Census Bureau has projections of populations, and basically what these projections show us is that this is not going to stop, okay? The Census Bureau put out a 2030 population projection for the state of Texas. You see that, the 2010 figure was 6.7 million people under 18. That figure is going to 8.9, almost 9 million, okay? So what this tells us is actually this is not only not going to slow down, it's actually going to be accelerating a little bit, okay? And we've had difficulty keeping up with the amount of enrollment growth already going on. And for as far as the eye of the Census Bureau can see, this is going to continue. Okay. Now let's take a look at some academic results. This is data from the NAEP, the Nation's Report Card. This is a source of federal education data. They give it to random samples of students in all 50 states since 2003. And this is the closest we can get to an apples-to-apples comparison between different states, because different state tests can't be easily compared. The SAT test is only taken by a self-selected group of kids, so that can't be compared from state to state very easily. The NAEP is the best we can do, and basically what the NAEP shows us is that if we look for full grade level proficiency in something like 8th grade reading, okay, this is the sort of the last reading measure of reading achievement that we can get. Proficient is a high bar, okay? This means, you're ready, you're, internationally comparable if you're at a proficient level. This does not mean that everyone that is below proficient is completely illiterate. Some of them are sort of have a partial mastery of grade level reading, and some have no mastery whatsoever, okay? In 2011, these figures for 8th graders in Texas broke down as 42% of Anglo students in Texas were scoring proficient in reading, only 17% of Hispanics, 15% of African Americans, okay? This is a huge issue, okay? That 42% doesn't go nearly as far as it used to be because today more than 50% of Texas public school students are Hispanic, okay? And that number for Hispanics has been pretty flat for a long time, okay? The state cannot tolerate educating 20% of Hispanic students to read at grade level. It simply is going to be a recipe for disaster unless that number comes up. This is what I was just telling before. Only 30.5% of students are Anglos in the system, and by the way, only fewer than half of them are learning to read proficiency. There's a problem there. So, and again, this is what I told you before. The scores for Hispanics are especially disturbing and flat over a long period of time. So, this is something I did for the Texas Public Policy Foundation last session. I said, well, what was the enrollment growth for Texas and the Texas public school system between 1990 and 2012? And it turned out that was, 1.45 million kids, okay? So the next thing was to say, well, what if what if we had twice as many charter schools and charter school kids as we actually got? What if we doubled the number of charter schools we had? Well, you see that second figure. It's 1.1 million. And finally, what if every single charter school west of the Mississippi River had opened in Texas? Right? Now, mind you, there are hundreds of charter schools in my state of Arizona. There are more charter schools, 700 and counting in California, right? If you took all of their enrollment and deducted it from the enrollment growth that the districts actually experienced in Texas, you see that the districts still would have gained almost 600,000 students between 1990 and 2000. So the bottom line on this is that our debate over school choice in Texas looks like this, right? School choice are the four horsemen of the apocalypse. That must be charter schools, and this one's vouchers, and that one could be tax credits, and this one's digital learning or something, right? This is going to lay waste to the Texas public school system and do all sorts of damage, okay? The reality is much more like this, okay? The lawmakers in the state of Texas could literally have passed a universal voucher program last session. Universal. Anyone could take it, go to another public, go to a private school, whatever you want. And the evidence is extremely clear that all that would have done would be to slow the rate of growth in the districts, okay? There's absolutely nothing that lawmakers in this state could do to reverse enrollment growth in the state of Texas and the districts. It's literally impossible. So I think it's time for us to, have a more realistic view of school choice programs, their impacts, and to start asking some very tough questions about where in the world are we going to put those 2 million students on the way. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Matt. I kind of just want to leave that picture up for the rest of the presentation. I like that a lot. Our next speaker is Tom Cura. Tom is the Senior Advisor and Data Analysis Director at the Office of the Texas Comptroller. He has overseen dozens of high-profile research and data projects, including the Financial Allocation Study for Texas, which is a wonderful tool on seeing how well school districts are performing with the money they get. I use it all the time. Tom, welcome.
Thank you. Is everybody hear me? Not very well. Not really. I'll try to talk really loudly. Is this on? Do we know? Is it? Yeah. Okay. As James mentioned, I'm from the Controller's Office, and I think I was brought here today because a number of the bills that implement scholarship programs, tax credit scholarship programs, or voucher programs have been have designated the Controller's Office as the administrating agency for whatever reason, and so because of that, we've put fiscal notes on these bills. In other words, we've estimated the possible savings that might accrue to the state from these bills, and I think that's probably why I was brought here to talk today. I will say that most of my comments will be based on things we've seen in the past, which have always been statewide programs. So these comments, however, I think would apply to a local program, particularly if it's a tax credit scholarship program, because it would operate in much the same way as statewide tax credit scholarship would be, only on a smaller scale. One of the things that happens, particularly in sessions where we are dealing with difficult budget situations, is proponents of a scholarship plan, tax credit plan, or voucher plan will come to our office, say, hey, we'd like you to administer this plan, we're going to file this bill, or we have this bill that's been filed. We think it's going to have huge savings. It'll help the legislature balance the budget, a couple $1 billion sometimes they'll tell us. We get to looking into the details, we put a cost estimate on it, and I should mention that as far as the state's school finance system is concerned, the Legislative Budget Board is going to be the final word on savings from any of these bills. But when we've put fiscal notes on them, they tend to be fairly consistent with what the LBB does, so I think I can speak to what we consider in both agencies. And inevitably, we disappoint the proponents. Our estimates are typically a little bit smaller of the savings. So I'm here today to tell you why we disappoint you so badly. And I just want to warn you that this presentation, there will be a little bit of math, but I promise it'll be simple math. So it's late in the day, just bear with me. When you design a program, tax credit program or voucher program, The design of that program is going to largely drive the savings. And there are a couple of things that are particularly important in that regard. The value of the tax credit or the voucher, and who is eligible for that. Those two things combined, the number of people who use the scholarship and the value of that scholarship will determine the savings to the state. And basically, the math is, if the value of the scholarship or the voucher is less than what the state spends on average for a student in public schools, the state will save the difference. The average spending on that student minus the voucher amount is the savings to the state for each. I told you this math would be simple. So this applies to any student who would otherwise be in a public school. In other words, the state will realize savings from students who take advantage of vouchers or tax credits, scholarships, if they otherwise would have been in a public school. If it's a voucher used by somebody who would have been in a private school anyway, there's no savings to the state because the state would not have been paying for that child. So eligibility criteria in these bills also comes into play in determining how much savings there will be. And so, and a lot of these bills will place restrictions on eligibility. Sometimes they'll say, look, you have to transfer from a public school to a private school to be eligible for this. They will sometimes do that and allow students who are entering kindergarten to take advantage. Now, in the early years, the students entering kindergarten will represent a small portion of those taking advantage of the scholarship. But over time, what you end up doing, particularly if there are no income eligibility requirements or other restrictions, the state will be paying for anybody who otherwise would have been in a private school, because if it's open to anybody and it's open to students entering kindergarten, then that first year we're going to get every kindergarten student who would have gone to private school anyway being the cost for the state. And the second year, it's every kindergarten and first grade student who would have otherwise gone to private schools who will be a cost to the state. Now, those costs typically, at least the bills we've seen filed, don't wipe out all the savings that are generated elsewhere in the system from students who otherwise would have been in public schools. So another way that these bills sort of limit the pool and make it more likely that students who take advantage of this are students who would have been in public schools is put income requirements on them. We see a lot of bills that say, hey, look, only economically disadvantaged students are going to be eligible for these scholarships. And those students are much more likely to be students who would enter the public schools rather than private schools because they can't afford the tuition typically. So that means that a higher percentage of the students will be students who would otherwise have entered public schools, and so most of those students will represent savings to the state, assuming the voucher amount or the tax credit scholarship amount is less than the average cost per student. I just want to mention one other thing that kind of comes into play for determining costs, and that's the complexity of your program. And it also can cause some angst with proponents when they see what we put on the bills. A very complex program is going to be more difficult to administer, and so will carry some higher administrative costs. Now, those are going to be minuscule compared to the savings that might be generated from the program at large, but they can play a role in delaying when you will see those savings. So if it's a very complex program, whoever the agency administering the program is going to take longer to get it in place. It's going to take longer for the public and private schools to adapt to it. So you'll see a slower uptake, and we'll assume that students will take advantage of it more slowly. And this points to another problem that sometimes comes up when people assume that they will get huge savings in the upcoming biennium, the biennium for which the appropriators are writing a budget in the state legislature. A lot of times, folks will come in and they'll say, look, we've got this plan. In the first 2 years, it's going to save a huge amount of money. It's going to help us solve the budget. When we get to looking at it, we think, okay, legislature doesn't wrap up its business until the end of May, and any bill like this is going to come down to the very end if it does pass it. The next school year starts late August. The odds of any agency having the rules written and in time for people to take advantage, for a lot of people to take advantage of the program in September of the following school year are pretty slim. So, by January, maybe we'd have everything up and running so that everything's in place and anybody who wants to could take advantage of this. But then you run into the problem of, hey, folks don't want to move their kids in the middle of the school year. So really, it's the second year of that first biennium where you might start to see take-up rates that are more consistent with what you'll see over the long haul. Now, what that means is when you see the cost estimates on a lot of these bills, you'll see in some cases a cost in the first biennium and then huge savings down the road. Now, part of that is because we're assuming there won't be full implementation until maybe the second year of the biennium. And because of the way the school finance system works, we fund schools based on enrollment in, I think, October and March of each year. But then we actually come back and settle up with them based on actual enrollment in the following year through the school's finance system. So those savings may not really materialize until the third year after you've passed this bill. So that's why sometimes you'll see costs on these bills in the early years, which of course disappoints proponents who are hoping they'll get their proposal passed because it'll result in savings. Now, I say all that fully understanding that proponents of school choice programs see a lot more value in these programs than just potential cost savings in the short term. So, but we do end up with folks coming in and being a little bit disappointed. Now, I think all of these things would apply to a tax credit scholarship program that's put in place by a municipality, say. It just would be, those savings would be concentrated in one school district or a couple cities where they did this, and so the savings might even be smaller than they would be on a larger scale program. And of course, other potential school choice programs that might be done at the local level, it would just depend on how those are designed and implemented. But a lot of these things that we talked about here would come into play there too. A full public school choice program within a school district that just allowed students to transfer from school to school would probably have no impact whatsoever on state school finances. School districts might decide to partner with private providers. I think this actually happened in the past, and the districts might see some savings there, but those would not rebound to the state typically. So I think that's about all I've got for today. I just would encourage you, if you do have a bill, you think it's going to have a big chunk of savings or might be administratively complex, talk to the agency that you would like to implement this bill. We've had some problems in the past where sponsors didn't maybe talk to us and wrote their bill. We read it. We didn't read it the way they intended the bill to be read. We assumed it'd have a huge administrative cost. They come talk to us. We tweak the language in the bill, and then the costs disappear because we come to an understanding of what it is they really intended, and we can help them write the bill so that it does what they intend. Or sometimes we just say, yeah, that's going to carry a cost if you do it that way, and they may go back and tweak their initial design. And it can help you avoid that disappointment of seeing that fiscal note. If you talk to us, talk to the Legislative Budget Board. If you're asking TEA to administer it, talk to them. And hopefully we won't disappoint you in the future. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Tom. Next up, we have Representative Scott Turner. Representative Turner was elected to the Texas House in 2012. He has immediately, I believe, distinguished himself as a leader in the House. Being in May, he was named to GOPAC's list of 2013 emerging leaders for his leadership in the Texas House, and named a courageous conservative by the Texas Conservative Coalition. Representative Turner.
How's everybody doing? Good. Can y'all hear me? Yes. Good. I want to change the tone a little bit of this, and a lot of times as soon as we hear the word school choice or we hear voucher or we hear tax credit, immediately we frown up. Our minds become closed. And I like to think about these things as different educational opportunities for our children. And I've been thinking about this a little bit. I think we just need to have a mindset change. We need to kind of have a paradigm shift when we talk about education. Public schools are great fits for some kids, and that's a fact. Some kids do very well in public schools. Some kids thrive in a public school education. I went to public school. I had great coaches and great teachers around me to help me in public school. But public school is not a one-size-fits-all deal. Every kid is not going to thrive in public school. every kid is not going to thrive in a charter school or a private school. But whatever the case may be, I believe that we as leaders, as a community, as servants to our children, need to offer up different kinds of educational opportunities. My nephew, Solomon, who my wife and I took in, are helping to raise him and train him. Father's gone. His mother is my sister. She needed help in a great way. And Ron and I took him in. He was in the public school system at the time, and he was doing horrible. He was just kind of a number in the classroom with the teachers. Not to blame that on the teachers, not to blame that on the public school system, but for this particular child, that wasn't working for him. And so we took him out of that school system and we put him into a private Christian school because that was the best fit for him. Not just to survive, but to thrive in his educational opportunities. And a lot of people say, well, you have the means and the ability to do that. And it's true, everyone does not have that opportunity. But I believe that if we can offer those opportunities, we could take kids like Solomon, who are in a position to where they need to be taken out and go to a place to where they can better perform and execute and grow and be molded and shaped, then we need to provide the opportunity. We have to have a mind shift in Texas. I mean, seriously, every time we talk about school choice, the first thing we see is frown. Or, no, that's not going to work. Well, how do we know? We need to try. We need to look at it. We have too many talented and smart people and innovative people in Texas. Some former educators, some former administrators, some former professors, business people in the private community to say that we can't get this done. And I want to offer that up as a challenge and encouragement to all of us. I read the stats, I read the information. 314,000 kids in Texas that are stuck in school districts that are underperforming them and underserving them. But we say we want a qualified workforce. We say that we need to pass the baton of leadership to the generation coming behind us, but yet they're not going to be prepared. 25% of kids leaving public school system or take remedial classes in college. To me, they're not preparing them. Public education has become too top-heavy. One-to-one teacher to non-teacher ratio. When I was in school, we had a principal and a vice principal. And you want to go see neither one of them. But today it seems as if we have, and you know what, God bless administrators and principals. I love them. I have coaches who move on to administration. But I think we need to get a better balance. And we have to have a different mindset. Are we more concerned about the institution of education, or are we more concerned about the children? And once we can do that, then we can figure out all the intricacies. Then we can figure out how we're going to help kids and get different educational opportunities into the communities and to the neighborhoods and ultimately into the state. It just depends on what our end goal is. My wife went to public school, I went to public school. And we did all right. And there's some kids who go to public school, and you may have some in public school, and they do phenomenal. But then we have some who do not. Some kids need to be in a smaller learning environment. Some kids need to be in an environment to maybe, what they're doing with their hands. They want to be in career and technology or whatever it is, and they need to be in that environment. Why should we rob them? All in the name of education. We can't hide behind that cloak any longer. And I said it today in my speech, we are not ranked in the top in education here in Texas. It's just the reality. But it doesn't mean that we cannot. We just need to tweak some things. We need to change some things, but we have to have the courage and the willingness to do so. Is it going to be perfect in the beginning? Nope. But if we continue to work at it, if we continue to forge away at it, and guess what? Every time we do this, we're creating competition. I lived in competition for 15 years in my life. That's how I made a living. Competition drives out the best in people. It brings out the best in people. And guess who benefits from that? Our children. If the teachers are having to perform at a high level, great. That means they're doing better for the children. If the administration is held at a high level of accountability, great. That means the teachers and the children and you and I, our tax dollars, will get the greater value from it. So I want to serve as an encouragement. Let's not be so closed-minded. Let's open up our hearts and minds, have kind of a paradigm shift and say, hey, you know what? It's not about the brick and mortar.
It's not about the buildings. It's not about the institution. It's not about those who benefit. It's about these kids. My office and I have a great office and I'm grateful for them. We work with kids in the Young Entrepreneurs Academy. Teaching them, you know what, you can start a business as a young person. No matter if you go to public school or private school. Get a great education, work hard, start a business. I mentor high school kids. Some athletes, most athletes, some not. Some in private institutions, some in public institutions. To tell them and to show them and to train them how important education is. How important it is that you don't just get put into this box of, hey, you got to go to college. Hey, you got to be a doctor. Hey, you got to be an athlete. You have to be this. No. What are you good at? What are your gifts and your skills? Help them. Because in the end, those are going to be the leaders that are going to be sitting at this table one day and we're going to be sitting out there listening. But it starts today. We got to give them opportunity. Internships. Business people like you, servant leaders like myself and other legislators in here. We could talk policy and legislation all day, but how often do we go into the neighborhood to take these cufflinks and these suits off and grab a kid and say, you know what? Doesn't matter what environment you're in. Doesn't matter where you come from. I'm going to help you with this education problem anyway, but let me take you and mentor you and show you and help you and put you in an environment to where you can thrive. That's the mindset that we need to have. It's not about I can care less about the institution. I love teachers, I love coaches, I love people who've gone to school and gotten their degrees and administrators. God bless you, thank you for what you do. But even you and I need to have a mindset change. It's about the kids. At the end of the day, if we do not give them the proper opportunities, we're cheating them. And then in the end, we're robbing ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Turner. Our final speaker for today is Monty Exter. Monty is a lobbyist with the Association of Texas Professional Educators, which is the largest educators association in Texas and the largest independent educators association in the country. Monty?
Thank you. I'm going to try my best not to go into a crazy coughing fit. I'll apologize right up front if I do. Getting over the flu from last week, but I think got the coughing licked, and I won't cough on any of y'all. Promise I'm good now. Anyway, you just thought you wanted to sit there. I actually think mostly want to address some of the things that I've heard up here because I think we've talked about a lot of really great things already, and I feel as though I've been brought in to sort of give that perspective of, you know, what do the teachers think? What does the establishment think? And give that perspective. And I'd like to say that a lot of what I've heard up here, I wholeheartedly agree with. First of all, to start with the very last thing you said, it is absolutely all about the kids. I don't think you're going to find any group of people who will agree with that statement more than those kids' educators. You know, I talk to my members all the time, and they are absolutely focused on the kids. That's what they got into it for. It certainly wasn't for the lavish paychecks. So that, I think, is a common ground that we can all start with and we can all work on. Going back to the beginning, two of the main themes that I heard were, you know, we have a lot of folks and we're getting more. That's absolutely true. We do have a lot of folks and we're getting more and more every day. And not only are we getting more, but we're getting the hardest ones to serve. And I actually like to liken the education system in Texas to an infrastructure. You know, water is an infrastructure, utilities are an infrastructure. Really, the system of education in Texas is also an infrastructure system. And I like to liken it a little bit in this regard to the roadways in Austin. If any of you guys have driven in the roadways in Austin, you know what happens to an infrastructure system when you don't maintain it and you add a whole lot of people. You get the worst drive times in the entire country in a city that doesn't really merit them per its size. I don't want to see that happen to our education system when we talk about the fact that we're getting lots more folks. What I hear is, great, then we need to really invest within our infrastructure of education in the system so that we can appropriately handle those folks and we don't mismanage them and we don't do a poor job of educating them, because that's ultimately going to drive down productivity in the state. Just as poor transportation policy has driven down productivity in the state. Just like poor water planning has the ability to potentially massively fiscally impact us in the state, so not properly supporting education infrastructure will do the same thing. The second point I heard was, not only do we have all these kids, but, maybe we haven't done such a great job with them to date. And that, I think I would like to just sort of soundly refute. When you go back and you look at the scores that we have, and I'll use the exact same test that was mentioned earlier, NAEP, and you break those scores out, Texas has done phenomenally well. Yes, when you look at the aggregated score on NAEP, we are middle of the country, but we don't have the same population that the rest of the country has. We have a much more diverse population with a much larger percent of hard-to-teach kids. And when you look at those scores from a disaggregated standpoint, what you find is that we have done amazingly compared to most of the rest of the country with those particular kids, such that, when you look at our Hispanic population or our African American population, in their individual testing in the 4th and 5th grade reading and math testing, you oftentimes see us in the top 5 of all the states in the country when you're looking at those. So how is it that we end up in the top 5 in that disaggregated standpoint, but 38th overall? Well, we have a whole lot more of those kids than somebody like Minnesota has. Therefore, that larger population makes that aggregate look less, because there is still a gap, and that gap is something that we have to address. But we have to do that with methods that are research-based and proven to actually address that gap appropriately. One of the other things I heard about was administrative balance. I absolutely agree. I think the most fundamental part, surprise, surprise, from the teacher lobbyist in education is the teacher. That is the most fundamental aspect of a child's education, is their teacher. And I think that the most appropriate thing that we could do then is to focus on that particular aspect by putting more dollars into the classroom. I didn't hear necessarily a reasoning for the imbalance of administrative versus classroom spending over time, but I would like to posit that we can actually peg a lot of that imbalance to the state's accountability system. While we have spent a lot of money actually purchasing tests, we have spent far more money administrating them. We spend days and days of instruction time. There are people whose full-time jobs revolve around administration, and we bring in lots and lots and lots of temp folks every single year just to administrate that test. It's the accountability system that has added this bulk of folks who get basically put into the administrative column. It's not that we have 10 times more principals and vice principals than we used to have. It's that we have this whole middle management layer that education just didn't used to have. And that is primarily because of policies, mostly accountability policies, that have gone into place over the last 20 years. And I think addressing those policies can do a lot to put some of those folks back into the classroom and to put more of the emphasis back on the classroom. In addition, I was really happy to hear about the topic of this particular session being on local. What are some of the local things we can do? Because I feel like there's a lot that's already going on there. We've got actually a lot of choice at the local level right now, and there's a lot of independence in a local independent school district. They have the ability to do all kinds of things: magnet schools, in-district charters, partnering with charter organizations that are outside EMOs, education management organizations, folks like KIP and IDEA. All of those types of things and many, many more, open transfer policies, the ability to have extra coursework aimed at students who need it. Lots and lots and lots of innovation is possible, and in many instances happening at the local level. And that should be fostered. And the best way to foster it is to, simply allow the locals to feel like they have the flexibility to get that done. And we already have a great system in place to do that. Because unlike some of the other methods that have moved forward, you have locally elected boards. That's actually something that I recently learned that I didn't realize in the past was a difference within our charter industry here in Texas, which I think by anybody would agree that that's one of the largest, if not the largest part of the choice debate at the moment. That's where most of the kids are when you're talking about choice. that in other parts of the country, most charter schools are actually not managed, but they fall underneath the governance of their local ISD. And that's not how we do it here in Texas. I didn't realize that that's not how everybody did it. So that's one of those issues where when you're talking about local and local control and choice, I would say that those local boards actually give you the most amount of choice. You have the ability to vote on them. They're absolutely going to be in your municipality. When you're talking about an entity whose board may or may not even be in state and who you cannot vote for, then I think you actually are talking about a reduction in choice. And that's not to say that charter schools aren't a great option and a great fit for some students. They are. But I don't think that they should be necessarily held up as the paragon or paradigm of choice to the expense of the ISD, because there's a lot of choice in the traditional public school as well. I think that's about all I have to say about that, but I really appreciate being asked to be on the panel, and I think a lot of good things have been discussed and talked about. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Monty. We have about, I believe, 15 to 20 minutes left for Q&A. First up.
Thank you. First to our chairman, appreciate the job that you're doing. I had the privilege of working with one of your predecessors who was a lot better looking than you. But I am proof positive that you can succeed when you don't look very good. I just wanted to tell you, I've been doing some unofficial research on school choice in my immediate family. I have 3 daughters and 5 grandsons. One group, public schools. One group, private schools. One group, homeschooling. And the homeschooling was not with a voucher. It was with great sacrifice. And the results in my little small sample are consistent with what I've read over the years from Friedman Foundation and others, that in terms of achievement and future, the private schools are in the middle, the homeschooling is very much on top, and the public schools are very much below. We need to make improvements to all of them, and we need to give choice to parents and to students to take the best of the options, and appreciate whatever you can do to achieve those ends. And Mr. Turner's comments, the kids come first, that's got to be uppermost.
Next question. If either that or stand and project, whichever you prefer.
The question is, are we part of an evolution or a revolution? That's for each of you to decide in education. I've been on the Dallas School Board when we sent the superintendent to prison. I've been part of charter schools, been part of private schools. But it's what Mr. Turner said in the beginning, it's people on people. You've got to have, first of all, I don't care what the administrative setup is, you've got to have a good principal that supports a good teacher. And they've got to be about the kid, not the institution or whatever else, or the football game. Mr. Exter, one of the things, and I was talking with the mayor of Dallas, and there's a lot, everybody's interested in our kids in making something positive happen, because we all can relate to successes. And one of the things that's been brought up is that we have diverse students, even more so today, but our teaching institutions have not caught up with the difference in diversity and the ability to communicate with a student. You just can't sit there on the road and just point to something. You have to engage. And what is your group doing in order to get colleges and universities that prepare teachers to go into the classroom and principals to get more engaged with the student, regardless how it's delivered?
Well, I think that's actually totally right, particularly when you're talking about the diversity of the teaching profession not keeping pace with the diversity of the student body. That's true. I've seen some really good programs out there that I think could help address that, that actually target promising students in a high school setting and help to route them towards an education profession with the mindset that they would hopefully go back and teach from the area that they grew up in, and therefore would have better rapport with those students because they would share a similar background. So I think that's one small thing. One of the things you asked, what are we doing? The two policy initiatives that I think that we really want to push forward that I think will actually, from top to bottom, have a much larger impact on education than anything else you can do. One are dramatically raising teacher standards and teacher quality. We can look at other places around the world to look at that. I believe that the best model of teacher preparation comes from Finland. They have just far and away the best teacher prep. The other part of that equation then is to also dramatically improve our teaching standards, the TEKS, here in Texas. In addition to them being overly broad and overly narrow at the same time, too broad, not deep enough, they also don't quite, although they do better than many states in the country, really keep up with the international benchmarks as far as at what point kids are learning things. Particularly that's true in math. We spend a little bit too much time on some of the basic mathematical issues in the early years, when in science, brain science has shown that kids have the ability to uptake some of those things much quicker than what we're putting them out, which will get them to higher level math sooner and get them better prepared for the world. So those are the two things I would say are to improve the standards, the TEKS, and also to much more highly professionalize the teaching profession by increasing teacher quality through increasing teacher standards in the state. And on the front end, not the back end. You can't really evaluate or test your way into quality. You have to prepare people to be quality.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Stacy Hawk. I'm really curious, sort of across the board, what your thoughts are on some other ways to really welcome and explore innovation in the education system. In the public space, obviously, charter has a little bit, it seems, more freedom to do that. And whether it's cost savings through electronically administering tests or mobile classrooms or school autonomy with performance-based compensation, all these different facets that I think there's a lot of room for exciting, perhaps, innovations to really foster new techniques and a revolution rather than evolution. So I just love to hear your thoughts on what some of the low-hanging fruit there is.
There's a lot of interesting things going on right now. If you think about it, our whole system of schooling, whether it's university or K-12 or whatever, is based on a premise that is less and less true. And that premise is that knowledge is scarce, so we need to train people who are specialized in certain types of knowledge and put them into a classroom with 20 to 30 students and impart that scarce knowledge, right? It's literally getting the pace to be the case now that knowledge is, and information at least, is hyper abundant, right? Now, exactly how you operationalize that is a big task, and it's going to take a number of years to kind of figure this all out. I'm not a guy that would say that, hey, we can just leave kids at home in their pajamas and they can watch Harvard classes on their computer and everything will be awesome, okay? However, you can take Harvard courses for free, right? And it's been recently worked out so that if you take an end-of-course exam that is proctored by a third party, where they had actually established that it's actually you and you actually take the end-of-course exam, that the beginnings of some universities actually granting college credit for that have begun. So, I mean, I think that that events and technological change is, fundamentally starting to change the way we approach education in a lot of different ways. And I'm not one of these Panglossian, hey, this is going to fix everything type of guys. But the opportunities are really enormous. They really are. It's just kind of, to me, it's exciting. But we'll kind of there's a lot of details to figure out.
I just wanted to
piggyback on that a little bit. I'm not sure that one's on. I agree in most part with what was said there. I also think that we've definitely come into an age where information is not the problem. There's plenty of that, and in many ways that's where some of our education system is broken down, because our education system oftentimes is aimed at trying to cram actual discrete facts into kids' heads. And really what's much more important is that we teach kids how to go out and acquire knowledge, not teach them what the actual knowledge is. And therefore pedagogy becomes even more important in the teaching profession versus content knowledge, although content knowledge is obviously still very important. And pedagogy oftentimes is what is left out of things like alternative certification programs. So I think that that's very important. I'll say that I think that technology is actually a bit of a mixed bag. There are some very exciting advancements in technology, and I think that technology is going to take us somewhere really exciting. But technology is also very expensive, and as of yet, its gains are unproven. You know, if you look at a country like Korea, who by international standards is, you know, pardon my language, kicking our butt from an education standpoint, their most technologically advanced piece of equipment in their room is a chalkboard. So while everybody has an iPad here, and possibly the interactivity brought by that is a great thing, I'm not sure that the cost-benefit analysis plays out for that yet. You know, because we've spent a lot of money on that iPad that we could have spent on something else, and it hasn't brought us the gains yet that we were hoping to see. Which isn't to say that it won't, but I think it's something that we really have to keep a close eye on. And the one area where I think that technology is not going to be, and we sort of have agreed, or about to agree on this, is that technology maybe is a great way to deliver content. You know, technologically delivered content is far more interactive than a textbook. However, technologically delivered instruction is far less interactive than an actual person. So I think that you really have to think about what you're looking at there. Technology and content, wonderful, although maybe too expensive for what it is. Technology and instruction, probably not a very good idea at this point.
A couple of things I've just thought about, and speaking of innovativeness and creativity, a couple of my colleagues in the House, Representative Harper Brown, had a bill that increased the cap on charter schools, but also made it easier to close charter schools that weren't doing a good job. You know, and that's one improvement that we made. And then my seatmate, Cecil Bell Jr., Representative Cecil Bell, had a bill that passed that I thought was very creative and innovative to improve the career technology training of students, because every student is not the same. And so those are some of the things that were being innovative in a way and creative in a way and helping to provide different pathways and greater opportunities for our children. And that was just on top of my head. I know it wasn't a technology question, but that's something that maybe people didn't know.
Next question? Yes, ma'am.
What about
I'll get you next.
Control of discipline returned to the teacher in the classroom?
I get asked about this a lot, to tell you, and you know, in my state of Arizona, you know, sometimes I'll have people who disagree with me, and they'll say, "Well, we don't have discipline in the classroom anymore." And my response, and Monty, I'd be thrilled to hear what you think about this. I mean, I usually say to them, "Well, you know, if your association were to come up to the Arizona legislature and lobby for a bill that would allow schools to have a more vigorous form of student discipline, I think they'd find an almost universal vote for it." You know, I know there's lawsuits and whatnot, this, that, and the other thing, but and there are balances to strike. But I think it's not what it needs to be, but it's also can sometimes be a red herring in terms of, you know, I mean, it's a problem that never seems to be seriously addressed.
Yeah, I would say that that's a pretty accurate assessment. I mean, you're not going to hear most of my members talk about having too much authority to discipline in their classrooms. I think that it's the other way around. And that authority has eroded over time, although in many ways that has less to do with state law and more to do with district policies and local administrations, I think, trying to protect themselves as these hit out on me now. You know, but in addition to that, I think what you also have to look at is that effective teaching, you oftentimes wouldn't know that you walked into a well-managed classroom by just walking in, because effective teaching should look a bit chaotic. You know, your classroom should be very active. Your classroom should look a bit chaotic, but shouldn't actually be chaos. You know, if you walk into a classroom and everyone is quietly sitting at their desks doing work, something is wrong. That's not a very engaging classroom. But at the same time, certainly management of a classroom is a big deal. There's a lot of professional development dollars spent on that because it's important for the teacher to be able to maintain that discipline. The state has been trying to balance that for longer than I have been alive and will probably continue to. We had pretty major legislation passed last time, actually swinging back the other way, saying no more ticketing, basically, of students. So we'll see how that shakes out. But again, I think it's a bit of a red herring because I don't think you're ever going to satisfy more than one person at a time on that issue as to whether or not you did it right.
Okay, we have time for one more question, if anyone's got one.
I think we all agree that teaching happens in the classroom with a teacher. And frankly, we've got to have a good teacher in the classroom. And what I've seen as a frustrating thing we've had is that we can't get rid of the bad teachers. And frankly, just coming up with a measurement. I mean, you talk about the different teaching styles, that's true. But at the end of the day, they're all putting out a product, and that product should be measured at some level. You know, whether it's through improvement, which I think is fair. If you got a student at this level when they came to your classroom, measure how much improvement you've had over the previous year. And every teacher should be able to show some improvement there. And frankly, you walk on any campus across this great state, and they can tell you who the worst teacher is on that campus, and they tell you who the best teacher is, and guess what? They get paid the same. And there's a problem with that. And it's not just prep as far as getting your master's degree, because I've read numerous studies that having a master's has no correlation between performance in the classroom. So we've got to have some way of measuring what's going on. I could also talk about the technology. There's numerous things. I think the trade-off just in the instructional materials is enough to bring it into it. Now, if you're just going to use this as a calculator, yes, there's no value to that. But until we learn how to use a computer for what it's really capable of, you can multiply the advancements in a classroom just by speeding up the time frame between when the subject is presented and when they take the test, or when they take the homework home and come back the next day and figure out they didn't get it. The teacher asked the class the question after she presented the topic, and she knows instantly whether or not the class got it or didn't. And if they didn't get it, she could spend that time right then going back over that same topic, maybe a different angle. So you can't tell me that we can't use technology, which has done amazing things across our country by the use of technology as far as innovation and technology and efficiencies. We've got to be able to implement all these things, but it's got to be a teacher. And the teacher's got to be taught how to use this, not just give them a laptop or a classroom full of kids and then expect the teacher to know how to really get the best of it. They need to go through technological training. They've got to be willing to do that. This is a new generation of kids. I hear all the time about little boys that have attention deficit. Well, they've grown up with video games we couldn't even imagine as kids. And now you walk in and you give them a textbook and say, here, now read this. What? I mean, it's like handing them a scroll. Here's your scroll. Now get after it. So my point is we've got to innovate. And we can't be held back by any one group saying, well, that's not the way we've always done it. This is a time of innovation where we've got to move forward as a state and as a country. And frankly, I'll just say, we need the teacher groups to come alongside us and say, it is about the kids. It's not about the institution, it's about the kids. What do we need to do for the kids to move forward in the 21st century?
Do we have time for one more?